Georgia goes down to Austin in a premier SEC matchup and takes on the Longhorns. Joe, a lot of people went into this game thinking it was the premier matchup of the season so far. And, man, the game, the way the tosses and turns, the interceptions, the turnovers, the great play by both defenses, if you want to look at it with all of those turnovers, happen here. But Georgia goes down to Austin and beats Texas 30-15. We have another number one team falling. Your thoughts on the game?
I've plenty to discuss on the on-field play for both these squads, Blake, but one thing I think is the most important. And this is something that is just so blatantly clear. Don't find a way to galvanize Georgia and Kirby Smart. Why would we allow for Georgia, of all teams that are the kings of finding ways to be disenfranchised and motivated, to have a chip on their shoulder? And that's what they got coming into this game. I mean, if you read the comments on the Georgia-Texas preview, it sounded like they were playing Vanderbilt. It sounded like they were playing some overhyped, bloated Georgia team that couldn't do anything. And they reminded us that they always step up to the plate in big matchups. Mm-hmm. Their defensive line specifically, their run game played much better, but their defensive line specifically stepped up to the plate and dominated in this game. I know we're going to talk about Georgia, or Texas rather, but Blake, they always find ways to win when their backs are up against the wall. There was no way in my eyes, like we said in the preview, that Kirby Smart and Georgia were going to falter after suffering a loss early in the season. They were going to realize their mistakes. They were going to realize how they can bounce back and not allow those to catch up to them in the future. And that's exactly what happened against Texas, that they were able to smother them and completely shut down their offense.
Now, I want to say this, though. They produced a lot of situations that if they do against a more complete team than Texas, they will lose. Carson Beck, these turnovers are bad, Joe. Like, we got to mention that. The 3 turnovers are very bad. But to your point, to start off with Georgia here, look, we talked about the OPI call or the DPI call that got overturned earlier. I don't want to spend much time on it. They overcame a lot, and Kirby talked about that in his postgame, like, hey, man, we overcame a lot. These guys were resilient, and nobody picked us. He called out ESPN. He called out his former boss, Nick Saban. Hey, none of you believed us. Now, both of us believed him. We picked them to win the game. Key thing that you said, Jalen Walker and Mikael Williams went off. 5 total sacks between the two of them. Joe, you had a total of 6 tackles for a loss for the both of them. Look, Jalen Walker went off. He had 8 tackles, 3 sacks, 3 tackles for loss. That D-line, who at many times would only rush 4 in critical situations, Joe, they got home. We thought all week, or most people thought all week, that Texas offensive line was better than what they were. Kelvin Banks got abused. Let's call it what it is. And not only did he get abused, but, Joe, even when I thought he had good pass sets, even though when I thought he did some good things, Quinn did not make good decisions, and Quinn held on to the football too long. But let me start off with this. How many times do I got to run out here after a Texas game and say that I don't think Quinn Ewers is as good as everybody paints him out to be? I think he is an average quarterback. I think he has some traits with him. I think he's got a good arm. But I've been saying this on this show for 3 years. He is not a quarterback that can lead you and make the plays that you need against a defense like this. Joe, the turnovers were abysmal. The sacks were abysmal, and it's why he got benched. I understand that Arch Manning is behind him. I get all that, and Arch is going to be a really good quarterback. And Arch probably gives you the best chance to win. Quinn massively messed up in crucial situations. I know that they came back in the second half and made it somewhat of a game. But, Joe, they were 2 of 15 on third down. And when I look at them, a lot of those situations were Quinn misreading things and not making right decisions. This is what I talked about last week and what we talked about last week about Texas. I didn't think that there was a team that they had played that could test Quinn or test this team with all these new things that are going on. Joe, we've talked about their running game. Okay, it's one thing when you run against Mississippi State. It's another thing when you run against Oklahoma, who can't score. But you got to be efficient in a lot of things that you do. Joe, let's look at this. In the running game for Texas, Joe, they could get nothing going. They had 29 rushing yards on 27 attempts. 29 rushing yards.
So
you want to talk about a defense that dominated?
Well,
now,
and to wait, one second. To contextualize that a little bit better, 7 sacks were on Quinn Ewers, but still their leading rusher only had 52 yards to Wisner. So to like better contextualize that, because a lot of those yards taken away were the 7 sacks on Quinn Ewers.
Well, even with that, even in that, okay. Well, Arch got sacked once. Okay, I mean you remember, but
yeah.
He was meaning Arch. Their running game, they suffocated him. As you put earlier, brilliantly, they suffocated him. DBs played a lot better too. Malachi Starks had 2 PBUs that were really good. I mean, Joe, let's just be honest. The last time we saw them against a team that could test him against Bama, their secondary was a little off. And I thought that they responded. And listen, this is Georgia. Look, the turnovers got to stop. They're not complete yet. And, Joe, if they can eliminate some things offensively, specifically the turnovers, Joe, this team is still a really good football team.
I think, too, to that point, both the points you just made. One, really good football teams find ways to rally when certain parts of that team they're struggling.
No doubt.
Carson Beck had probably one of his worst games. Just to be completely honest, he made a lot of really risky bad throws. He could have had more interceptions than he had in this game. I'm not trying to knock it, but he played a very bad game, was forcing the ball into so many tight windows that were not there. But what showed up, despite him having one of his worst games, is his team, and more specifically his pass rush, who had 7 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, to say, Carson, we got you, man. We got you. We got your back.
Really interrupt. Did you see when he came over to the sideline what was happening? Did you see like the interaction? So his second pick, Jalen Walker comes up to him, grabs him, and says something to him. And I'm thinking in my mind, he's like, oh, what did he just say to him? I'm assuming like, hey, brush it off. By the way, Jalen had a sack the very next series. Yeah. So to rudely interrupt you, Joe, you are 1,000% spot on that when they made bad mistakes defensively, Mikael Williams with 2 sacks, Jalen Walker, who, by the way, dude, that kid is a beast. That kid is.
I'm a big fan of him in the draft world. I think that kid is a riser, and he's building some steam. He played himself maybe into the.
He put arguably the second best tackle. You talked about the draft. He arguably put Kevin Banks on skates. Joe, he would hit him with, and listen, Banks is more of a mauler of a left tackle. He's more Proctor than he is Campbell in a lot of different ways. Joe, the way that he would move Banks's hands off of him was a technical clinic of how to do things. But, Joe, I got to say one thing about this Georgia team, too.
Well, can I finish what I was talking about?
Oh, sorry. My bad.
No, you're good. You mentioned the secondary, though, and the big reason why they lost to Alabama, Blake, was because their secondary did not play well. They got cooked by Ryan Williams. They gave up a ton of big plays. That was what allowed Alabama to separate so much in the first half. They dominated. You talk about Malachi Starks having just a really brilliant performance with some of the PBUs that he had in this game. Your outside corners played arguably their best game. They gave up a couple shots, but they were pretty locked down. There were plenty of idiots. Yeah, well, that's more important. You've got all these athletes. If you come down and you tackle and you don't allow anything after the catch, this Texas team cannot succeed to the degree that we know. I saw idiots this week saying that this Georgia team was good, but they weren't great. BS. Well, you clearly haven't been watching the games if you think that that's the case with this Georgia squad. They played a bad game against Alabama, and the most important part is that what I said at the beginning, Georgia is motivated and well-coached enough that when a position group plays bad in a game, they're going to bust their ass in the coming weeks to get better and get ready for the next upcoming big opponent that they have on the schedule. And that's exactly what the secondary did.
Well, they were tested, unlike Texas, and they got into this situation. Joe, think about this. I was thinking about this going into halftime. Boy, I wonder what Kirby says in reference to, like, hey, remember when you were down against Bama? And remember when you came storming back to take a lead? Don't let that happen again.
Yeah.
Like, you end it. But I'll say this. In reference to Carson Beck, the turnovers have got to be eliminated. Joe, they're going to lose another football game in the regular season if he keeps turning the football over. I mean, look, are some of them like anticipatory throws that the guy's not there? Fine. But the hitch, the one that got overturned, the interception that was a PI, wasn't a PI, Joe, let's call it what it is. That's a bad throw. It's a very bad throw. That's got to stop. But, man, the player of the game to me offensively is Trevor Etienne. 22 touches, 110 yards, and 3 touchdowns. I thought was, Joe, not even – I didn't talk about the rushing because I went touches because a couple of the passes that he caught, okay, were extensions of the running game. That young man played a phenomenal thing. Joe, think about this. The 2 catches that he had both went for first downs on third down critical situations. They kept the chains moving. Being simple sometimes wins football games. And listen, them leaning on him. Joe, we didn't say this, but we kind of hinted at it in the preview of this game. You got to give that man 20 touches a game. He can continue to be really good for you.
Well, more than that. And that's the thing here. The one thing that irked me with Georgia, and if there was like a negative to pull from this game outside of the turnovers for Carson Beck, why does Mike Bobo hate running the football? Like, seriously, there were times in the third quarter, beginning of the fourth quarter, I tweeted this out. I think there were 10 minutes left in the game. There was the one drive, and I don't remember the exact timing of it, where they got the ball back, and they only took like 36 seconds off the clock. I don't get it with Bobo. Yesterday was a perfect example, Blake, of why they can run the ball. They can run the ball when they try to. The injuries at offensive line at Tate Ratledge. One second, let me just finish. The injury to Tate Ratledge has not taken away from the run game, I think, as much as some people believe that it did. They can run the ball more. This offense was great last year because they ran the ball effectively, and they need to keep leaning on it.
Pause. I get what you're saying. However, Joe, they're playing 8, 9 yards off of the receivers. They're playing off. Okay,
because they're getting baited into doing it.
Hold on. If Carson Beck can't take a 2-step hitch, fire a hitch route, and get it complete, Joe, there comes a part where I agree with what you're saying. Okay, there also comes a part if I'm Kirby Smart and there's a DB in Texas that's 8 yards off of my receiver, I got to be able to make that throw. And, Joe, the interception that he threw, that PI, no PI, whatever it is, Joe, that's a simple one-on-one off coverage. You got to complete that hitch. Let's just be real with that. Okay,
I get that, but his best performances last year came when they had balanced offensive attacks. His worst game last year, where I think this skid started a little bit for his performances, was in the SEC championship game, where they took away the run game. They completely took away the run game. They said, Carson Beck, if you're so good, beat us. And that's what teams are doing right now. I think that if you run the ball more, there's less on his shoulders. He's not just trying to do too much, and he's just playing coherent, good football.
Yeah, I see. It's difficult for me to articulate this. I agree with exactly what you're saying. However, I also look at a guy like Carson Beck. If you're a first-round pick, Joe, you got to be able to.
I've talked to a lot of people about this recently. He's playing himself out of the first round.
Okay, it doesn't matter. Screw it.
Okay.
If you're who we think you can be, okay, Joe, regardless of who we think he can be, screw what I just said. You got to be able to complete an 8-yard hitch route. Sorry. I mean, like that is as simple as grandmama's homemade cooking. Like, you got to be able to hit the hitch route. Now, let's turn to Texas. Joe, I look at the Texas Longhorns and just say, like, you had not been tested. And we had talked about all week about them not being tested. And what did I hear? I heard, number one, I was wrong. Number two, they're the most dominant team in football, and you have no idea what you're talking about that they can't run the football. Texas had 27 carries, 29 yards. Now, in context, you're right. Those sack yardage, it really puts it back. But, Joe,
they still didn't cross 100.
Well, not only that. You can't look at that game and say that you had an effective running game. That interior of that defensive line grew up last night for Georgia, and that is the biggest weakness for Georgia. Now, I thought Texas offensively, for what it's worth, I thought they played pretty good. I mean, Joe, they were on the field a lot in that first half. I mean, they were getting smacked in the face because you couldn't get a first down. Joe, I think that this Texas offense is flawed. I really do. I've kind of been hinting at it for weeks, and here we are. If you can't run the football, you have a big deal. And here's a hot take. Arch Manning gives you the best chance to win because he can actually extend plays and run. And I'm going to continue to say this. I said it last year. I said it again this year. Quinn Ewers is an average quarterback at best. The 4 turnovers killed you, but he is an average quarterback at best.
BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts. He's a gifted quarterback who does not make the right decisions. A lot of people that I talk in NFL circles and just the draft media folks that I talk to share that same sentiment, that the traits are there and he has games where he makes great decisions, but seemingly there are a lot of performances like this on film, like he had against Georgia, where held the ball too long, took some really bad sacks, had some really, really bad turnovers that took him out of it. I don't know for certain if Arch really, truly saves them. But I
think he does. I think he does in this sense. Joe, he had the longest run for Texas the last 2 weeks at 21 yards. He extends plays. He knows. And here's the thing.
He's a good athlete, and I think that is something that this offense is missing at the current moment because of the injuries that they have at running back. I also think that this was a poorly called game by Sark because
I agree.
I don't think Jaden Blue had a single carry. I think that they only threw him passes in this game, which is really stupid that, you've got your 2 better running backs are the only ones who can do anything. Wisner and Blue, get Blue the football more. But yeah, I think it's time. And this is another thing from Texas fans that we talked about that got pushed back on, that we said, like, maybe it's worth considering. I think it's definitely worth considering making that move if you don't have faith in Quinn and you need a better athlete back there.
Well, he gives you a chance to win because he's athletic. Now, where does Texas go from here is the question. I mean, they still have a favorable schedule, and I don't think we should overreact to them losing to Georgia. Okay, come on. But Joe, there's going to be other stretches down the season where you have teams that can really test you. Now, I know Texas fans are going to laugh at this. You can't overlook Vandy. You just cannot do it. And I know that game's in that. Joe, they can't do it. I mean, look, I saw an Alabama team that could barely run the football in critical situations, and they have better running backs and a better overall running game than you. So I look at that and say, hey, you had struggles against Georgia. Yes. You could go back into another situation and have struggles too. Joe, I thought defensively, look, they got to lean on their defense. I know Sark wants to be the ultimate play caller. The touchdown to Bond, he's in motion, he's out of motion, he's in, he's out, he's in, he's out. They throw the touchdown. You got to play complementary football. You have to. And I thought that Georgia came out and punched him in the mouth, and Sark did not have an answer to it. He didn't know what to do there. But I look at Texas and say, listen, I don't want to overreact to this loss to what is a really good football team.
That's, I think, the nice way to close this segment out after we kind of scorned Texas quite a bit. But you're 100% right.
They deserve to be scorned. They had 4 turnovers and 29 rushing yards, brother.
They do deserve to be criticized for playing a weak game and then also for all the crap that they were talking. But you are 100% right that, like, Texas didn't just completely evaporate from the national championship conversation. It has not. We gave Georgia the grace to improve, and I'm going to give Texas the same grace to improve, just like they did last year after the Oklahoma loss. They improved. They got better. They finished the season really strong. They need to navigate what is going to be a very messy quarterback situation that Sark has now created, which he didn't need to create. He didn't need to bring Arch Manning into the game when he did. There comes
a part where when Quinn went down and Arch played the best of the way that he did. I mean, Joe, let's just be honest. I mean, Quinn was very bad. He was very bad, man. I mean, that whole first half, he was completely erratic.
But the whole point is that now you have to make that decision, and you need to come out and speak very confidently in who you're going with. Otherwise, it could completely fracture your offensive chemistry and momentum, because last thing you need is a confused offensive meeting room not knowing who they're relying on.
Very true.
But you are right, though, that things are not over. They can still win the SEC championship game. They have a very favorable schedule. If they can win out and they can beat Texas A&M, just like LSU, who we're going to get to in a bit, they control their destiny to still be in this picture. I think they still go to the playoff. I don't think that there's any doubts there. And I think that anyone who thinks that they're out of it is completely overreacting.
Yeah, they have a favorable schedule, and they're more talented than a lot of the teams that they face down the stretch here. Maybe A&M would be the only one that maybe would test them. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at it.
I would think that they could, but yeah, let's get.
Yeah, I mean, you don't overreact. You overreacted to Georgia. Don't overreact to Texas. All right, Tennessee let's get to Tennessee and Bama.